I'll just kick it off and then pass it off to my co-chair. My name is Hannah Pingree. I'm the director of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future and the co-chair of the Maine Climate Council with Commissioner Melanie Loisem from the Maine DEP. And this is the first meeting of the new Maine Climate Council that has been named by Governor Mills just a month or so ago. I think for many of you on this Zoom screen, you've been with us since 2019, so thank you for sticking with us. And I know that this Climate Council meeting is, again, our first. It is on Zoom. We hope to be with you all in person at some point early in the fall to really kick off the next climate planning process. But today, Zoom made more sense for folks dialing in from Northern Maine and all over the state, folks who are very busy in the legislature. I will just say we are doing this on a morning that some of our new legislative members are also in session, so our apologies for that. We're keeping them up to speed. And a lot of our commissioners are here or represented also by some representatives of their agencies because it's a busy time for them. So we're in the final stretch. I won't tell you when the legislative session will end because I have no idea. We're hoping it's in a month or so we can all go home for the 4th of July. But again, thank you all for being here. So I just want to quickly give some quick context and then pass it off to Melanie to sort of help go around and introduce all the members of the Climate Council, including our returning and new members. But again, I just want to thank you all. For a lot of you, you've signed on. The commissioners had really no choice but to sign on. Governor Mills believes strongly that continuing to make progress on climate is a top priority. So a number of members of her administration in key areas are on this Climate Council and really important participants. But a lot of you have re-upped and are willing to spend more time on this because it is so important. And then we have some new members who are incredibly excited to have engaged over these next couple of years. So just a quick reminder, we presented a climate plan as required by law December 1 of 2020, and we are now in the year 2023, and a new climate plan is due on December 1 of 2024. So I will just say that the last several years have gone by quickly, and we are excited to dive into the work with all of you of creating the next climate plan. Melanie and I will talk a little bit more about that at the end of the meeting, but I will just say that our intention is to build on the good work that's been done. Maine Won't Wait, I think, has been a really powerful document that has engaged communities, the business community, state government, lots of people across our state, and our intent is to build on that work, to not throw it out, but really figure out where we need to hone our strategies to ensure that we are making progress. I will just say that this is a really important meeting as we are here to really officially hear the recommendations of the Equity Subcommittee. That committee has done incredibly heavy lifting over the last couple of years under the leadership of Ambassador Dana and Gabriella Alcalde from the Sewell Foundation, who have led this group with some incredible staff. The equity work has been a part of our Climate Council process from the very beginning, and we've evolved how we've done it. And I think what they're going to present on here today is actually building a really good sense of where we are over the past couple of years, but more importantly, how do we ensure that our next climate plan has solid benchmarks, more ambitious goals for how we ensure that everybody's a part of this climate plan, low-income populations across the state of Maine benefit from climate action and progress. And again, I am incredibly grateful. I think all of the working groups have engaged in this work. Lots of people across the state of Maine have had meetings on this. We've engaged with communities. So again, I really want to thank them for their leadership. And again, to you new members of the Climate Council, you are helping us kick off a new process with a piece of work that is both a piece of work that builds on the past Climate Council, but is a really important way to kick off our next body of work with the next plan. So I will stop there and pass it off to Commissioner Loisem, who will tell you about all the exciting things she's been doing, but more importantly, make sure that we introduce all the members of the Maine Climate Council. So should we just quickly share the agenda? Is that where we're going here? So this, just a quick overview of what we're doing today. We're going to do introductions. We're going to spend the bulk of our time on the Equity Subcommittee recommendations. I think we'll have some time for discussion, and our hope is to agree on the metrics that have been proposed by the Equity Subcommittee and the path forward to engaging on these issues more proactively in the next climate plan. We're going to talk quickly about the next planning process, and then let you all go back to all the work you're all doing in Augusta and in your workplaces and everywhere else. So I will pass it back to Melanie to introduce everybody. We have a little time to make sure that we know who's returning and who is new here. And I also see Representative Kessler, who's probably calling in from the legislature. So I'm glad to see that he's here.
Thanks, Hannah. All right, so I'm not going to tell you about all the things that DEP is doing, but I'm Melanie Loisum, Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection and co-chair of the Climate Council with Director Pingree. I generally wear two hats and try to be clear about which one I'm wearing when we engage here, but I'm often a little myopic in my approach to this and very DEP centric, but I try to think more broadly. So just so you know in advance, if I'm being myopic in our conversations and seem like I'm too DEP focused, feel free to kick me, which will be difficult on Zoom. I would note, I find it interesting that as we're kicking off this next cycle, here we are in Zoom again. So as Hannah mentioned, in the last 4-year planning process, she didn't say the P word, but this council did survive the pandemic, and we did do all of this exactly this way in the Hollywood Squares fashion. So thank you all for joining us again in this forum. I just throw out there for one of the things that we should probably plan to quantify moving forward is how much CO2 emissions we are saving by engaging with one another this way, as opposed to all of us having driven to probably Augusta to have this meeting. So just to put it out there to suggest that we might want to think about that. So I'm going to do introductions. We're going to try to put names to faces, such as they are in our tiny little squares here this morning. So I'm going to try not to do this too much like a Ferris Bueller roll call, but it is going to be a bit that way. All right. So there are 39 of us. We do not have all day, so we don't have lots of time to talk about ourselves. I'm going to say who you are and which seat you're in as a Climate Council member, and would ask you all to then unmute yourselves, introduce yourselves, say quickly what organization, agency, etc. you represent, and then I'll call on the next person, and then anticipate that over the next couple of years, hopefully we will all have plenty of time to actually get to know one another as real life people who are more than 1 inch tall. All right, so here we go. All right, so you've met me and Hannah. I'm gonna save Molly and Sarah for last. So first, a shout out to, I believe, the one legislator that I've seen as I've been trying to scroll through here, our legislative members, Representative Kessler.
Hi, good morning. Once again, catching me on the way to Augusta. I'm Chris Kessler. I represent part of South Portland and a smidgen of Cape Elizabeth. I've been serving on the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee for the past 5 years now, and I primarily work in the residential energy efficiency world, mainly around weatherization, but all things energy and the residential. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to do a quick collective shout out to our other legislative members so you all know who they are. And in the event that I miss them in the participant list, we have Senator Stacey Brenner, Senator Matt Harrington, and Representative Nathan Carlo, who will also be our legislative representatives on the council. Are any of you here joining us this morning? All right, I don't think so. All right, moving on to state agencies. I see Director Elaine Clark here on behalf of the Department of Administrative and Financial Services.
Hi, Elaine Clark, Deputy Commissioner of DAFs, and under DAFs are a lot of agencies that are doing tons of work on CO2 issues. They include Bureau of General Services on buildings, procurement on procurement issues, and we have a central fleet, so we're very involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone this morning from the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry?
Yes, this is Jody Sapphire, Special Assistant to the Commissioner of the Department of Ag, Conservation, and Forestry, and I'm here today representing Commissioner Beal, who's traveling, and also previously served as facilitator to the Natural and Working Lands Work Group during the last plan.
Thanks, Jody. Do we have anyone from the Department of Economic and Community Development?
Good morning, Heather Johnson, Commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development. Thanks, Melanie.
Morning, Heather. How about Department of Health and Human Services?
Good morning, everyone. Mike Abbott from DHHS and specifically with Maine CDC, Environmental and Community Health, which includes drinking water and food safety, childhood lead poisoning prevention, radiation control, and environmental toxicology. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Mike. How about Inland Fisheries and Wildlife? All right. Marine Resources. As Director Pingree said, unfortunately, all of us are very busy. All of you are very busy as well, dealing with the legislative session. So apologies that we can't have everybody here this morning, but we'll be getting everybody up to speed. Anybody from Department of Transportation? All right, and I see Major General Douglas Farnham with us this morning.
Morning, Melanie. Yes, I'm the commissioner for the Department of Defense, Veterans, and Emergency Management. And primarily, I think Annie Fuchs has been our rep from MEMA, who's got a part to play. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone from Department of Education?
Yes, good morning, Melanie, and all. Scott Brown, Director of School Construction for the department. It's great to be here this morning.
Thanks, Scott. Good to see you. How about Governor's Energy Office?
Good morning, Commissioner. I'm Dan Burgess, Director of the Governor's Energy Office, co-chair of the Energy Working Group.
Morning, Director. And Maine State Housing Authority.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Brennan. I'm Director of Maine Housing. We're incredibly active in housing construction and creation and preservation, as well as administering a host of federal programs. I'm excited to be back with the council and looking forward. The council has really helped us, guide us, and direct us in our honing our policies. I will have to drop off at 10 o'clock, but it's great to be with you all today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And then lastly, anyone from Department of Labor?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Samantha Dina, Director of Special Projects in the Commissioner's Office, and I help lead and coordinate workforce policy and initiatives. Good to see you all.
Excellent. Thanks, Samantha. And then next, our member to represent Maine's tribes, Ambassador Molly and Dana.
Thanks, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. I'm Penobscot Nation Tribal Ambassador Molly and Dana, and I co-chair the Equity Subcommittee.
Good morning, Ambassador. Next, I'm going to go through our public members. This is in order of the way they're laid out in statute. So I'm going to rattle off what your position is in your name and then ask you to introduce yourself. So our member to represent Marine Fisheries is Bob Baines.
Good morning. I'm Bob Baines. I'm a commercial fisherman fishing out of Sprucehead for over 45 years, representing the Maine Lobstermen's Association, as well as all other fisheries here in the state.
Thanks, Bob. Our member to represent agriculture is Melissa Law.
Good morning. My name is Melissa Law. I'm a co-owner of Bumbleroot Organic Farm in Windham, Maine. And this is my second term on the council. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Our member to represent municipal government is Gary Lamb.
Good morning, Gary Lamb. My day job is a Hollowell City Manager, massive population of 2,570. I actually brought donuts today. They're here at City Hall, but I'm sorry I can't get them all to you. Former IFNW wildlife biologist a long time ago. Since then, code enforcement officer, planning director in Old Orchard Beach, and 3 stints as town managers in Greenville, Waterboro, and now Hollowell. And I'm happy to be here. I'll be gathering comments from all nearly 400 towns, both pro and con. So thank you.
Our member to represent the forest industry is Pat Strauch.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pat Strauch. I'm the executive director of the Maine Forest Products Council. We try and represent everything from people that work with planting trees to producing forest products, golf tees and paper and lumber. Glad to be a part of the group again.
And our member to represent the state's energy sector, Ken Coburn.
Hi, Ken Colburn here. I live in Bar Harbor, and I'm retired from a career of being a regulator in the environmental side and then advising regulators on energy and environmental issues. I am happy to co-chair the Energy Working Group with Dan Burgess.
And our member to represent the building or construction trades, Matt Marks.
Hey, everybody. The folks I represent at AGC are commercial builders throughout the state, and they're building the types of infrastructure that are in the public market and also the private market. Glad to be here.
And our member to represent the manufacturing industry, Jim Brooks, a new member who I might mention may be too humble to mention that he was involved with, I believe, what might have been the state's first climate planning effort way back in 2003. So welcome back to the process, Jim.
It's great to be here. For most of you that don't know me, but I see a lot of familiar faces. Ken and I work together quite a bit. Ivan, this shows my age. Ivan taught me at the university. Pat and I went to school together, took some classes from Ivan. So, and I worked with Melanie. Great to be here, and just glad to be a part of climate change planning again. Thank you.
And our member to represent organized labor, Francis Eanes, also a new member.
Hey folks, great to be with you. Francis Eanes, Executive Director of the Maine Labor Climate Council. We're a coalition of 20 labor unions and organizations here in the state of Maine, representing 60,000 working people. And our sole purpose is here to help advance ambitious climate policy at scale and scope that we know we need, and make sure we do it in a way that puts working people first. Great to be here.
And we have 2 members to represent environmental nonprofit organizations and private foundations. First, Kate Dempsey. Or anyone from Nature Conservancy. And Sandy Buck. I know I saw you out there.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Sandy Buck. I am the former president of Horizon Foundation and used to be the co-chair of the Climate Change Funders Forum, who've been supportive of this program, this work for the last 4 years. Happy to be back.
Good to see you, Sandy. We've got a couple of more people that I missed early on that have joined us, so I'm just going to quickly go to Commissioner Kelleher from Department of Marine Resources.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Pat Kelleher from DMR. Sorry, my camera, I don't know what's going on with I'm on my tablet and I can't get my camera to work this morning. So you'll have to do without my lovely smiling face here this morning. I know that's a stretch, Melanie.
Yeah. Excuses, Pat. Go ahead. Mute yourself. And then I think I missed Efficiency Maine Trust. Michael Stoddard, are you out there?
I'm here, Melanie. Michael Stoddard, Executive Director and Co-Chair of the Buildings, Infrastructure and Housing Work Group.
Thanks, Mike. Good to see you. All right. Now on to, we have two members with expertise in climate change science. Ivan Fernandez.
Good morning, everyone, including all those young alumni out there. I'm at the University of Maine in the School of Forest Resources, Climate Change Institute, and the School of Food and Agriculture, and I co-chair the Science and Technical Subcommittee with Dr. Arnold and Dr. Dixon.
And with that introduction, Dr. Arnold.
Hi, everybody. My name is Susie Arnold. I'm the Senior Ocean Scientist at the Island Institute in Rockland. Nice to see everyone.
Then we have two members with expertise in resilience, climate change adaptation, emergency management, or disaster risk, starting with Amy Landry.
Good morning, Amy Landry. I'm the Executive Director of the Androscoggin Valley Council of Governments. We're a regional planning organization and we serve municipalities in Androscoggin, Franklin, excuse me, and most of Oxford County. Thank you.
And Jay Cam.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jay Cam, Senior Planner with the Northern Maine Development Commission in Caribou. Much like Amy, we're a regional council that serve all of our communities in Aroostook County, one community in Washington County, and several communities in Penobscot County. I'm also a member of the Transportation Working Group.
And then we have our member to represent Maine Youth, Amara Afehi.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Amari Beji. I work in policy at the Maine Environmental Education Association to advance environmental awareness and accountability for Maine's people. I'm also a rising senior at Northeastern University, and I'm really looking forward to serving on the council with you all.
Thanks, Mara. So great to have you joining us. And then lastly, we have two other government or public members, Noel Bonham.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the State Director for AARP Maine. We are a member-based organization. We have about 250,000 members here in Maine, and we represent the interests of older adults, and therefore, connected to that, our concerns with climate and energy, affordable energy, and so happy to be here.
And then last but not least, Jesse Perkins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Perkins. I'm the Executive Director of the Bethel Area Chamber of Commerce here in Western Maine. I love being under the other representatives. It sounds like I can just do whatever I want. I find that oddly freeing. This is my second term, and I'm really honored to be back and being able to serve another term. And I'm really excited to see so many new people. So welcome to everyone. And I try to bring to this a lens of small towns, small businesses, and tourism economy too. So try to bring that expertise to the conversation. Nice to see you all.
Awesome. Welcome back, Jesse.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That was remarkably efficient. So well done. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Director Pingree.
Great. Melanie, did I miss this? Did I see Dan Kleben out there, and did we introduce him?
Oh, did I miss him? I should have ended with, I'm so sorry for everyone I missed. And by the way, Sarah and Amalia, which you're going to cover.
Yes. Okay. Well, first I'm going to call out Dan Kleben, who's our returning representative of small business. Saw you there, Dan, I think at some point.
I'm here. Dan Kleben, I'm the co-founder of Maine Beer Company in Freeport, Maine. And as Director Pingree said, I am here to represent the interests of Maine's small business community. Excited to be starting my second term.
Great. And sometimes when we have celebrations, Dan also brings refreshments. So thank you for your return, Dan. That's not just why we picked you again. And then last but not least, I also saw a representative of Maine's larger businesses, and we have a new member from Hannaford Corporation. Todd, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Todd Bowen. I'm the Vice President of Retail Operations for Hannaford Brothers Supermarkets, and I'm really glad to be here today.
Okay, we're batting cleanup. Did we miss anybody else who believes they're on the Maine Climate Council? All right, great. Well, this is an awesome group. And again, I really appreciate all of you who are re-upping and joining the Maine Climate Council. Melanie and I are incredibly excited to work with you. And again, see you in real life at some point. The plan is for September. So we'll give you the summer off, but plan to dive in then. So last but not least, I just want to introduce a couple of staff members, primarily from my team who are here to support you. Melanie and I are always happy to take phone calls and emails from Maine Climate Council members, questions about the process, what we're doing, your opinions, ideas. We are always ready, but our incredible staff are also even better, sometimes prepared to answer your questions. So I'm going to first introduce Molly Siegel, who is our new Maine Climate Council coordinator, and we are very excited to have her here. And I am sorry to Michael Stoddard, who he recently let us borrow her permanently to do this work. So Molly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Hannah. My name is Molly Siegel. I'm also called Amalia, so if you see emails from her, it's the same person. And I'm excited to be the new coordinator for the council and to be working with all of you to support you and the working groups as we move towards updating the climate plan.
Great. Sarah Curran, who's the deputy director in my office and really managing a lot of our climate planning, and as many of you know, is incredibly organized and why anything ever goes well about our planning. So Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all and looking forward to working with you. Thanks, Hannah.
Great. And I'm going to quickly just call out a couple other members of our team. Brian Ambrette, why don't you introduce yourself, and then Taylor, and then Jess.
Good morning, all. Brian Ambrette. I'm the Climate Resilience Coordinator in GoPIF, staffing the Community Resilience Working Group and currently leading the Community Resilience Partnership Grant Program.
Hi, I'm Taylor Lebrecq. I work with the Maine Department of Transportation and the Governor's Office, and I focus on transportation-related emission reduction strategies and resiliency strategies and support the Transportation Working Group.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Scott. I'm a senior climate advisor here at GoPIF. I've been staff support to the Equity Subcommittee and also work with Taylor on clean transportation issues and on the state's Lead by Example initiatives. It's good to see many of you again this morning.
Great. And I also see Ashley and Lucy. If you both want to quickly introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Ashley Krulik. I just joined the GoPIF team as a Community Resilience Partnership Program Manager. And yeah, just started 3 weeks ago. Super excited to work with you all.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Lucy Van Hook, and I'm in the background at the GoPIF team working on BIL funding opportunities focused around climate resilience. Good to see you all.
Great. Okay. I'm about to introduce our should we introduce Ambassador Dana? Yes. Okay, good. And so I will say the other person who has, I think, not been introduced on the Zoom screen is Gabriela Alcalde. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, although you're about to do a lot of heavy lifting?
Yes, I'm Gabriela Alcalde. I'm the Executive Director of the Elmina V. Sewell Foundation. You'll hear a lot from me for the next hour.
Great. Okay, so thank you all. And again, we look forward to more in-person work together. But we are going to launch into the incredibly heavy lifting and work, which I mentioned, of the Equity Subcommittee. But as we do that, I want to just give some quick context as sort of how we got here and the process that the former council has gone through on issues of equity and how we really engage them in our climate planning process and our outcomes. So Molly, if you'll just put up those next couple of slides. Okay, so just a quick reminder, the original Maine Climate Council law, which put the emission reduction requirements in law, which created the Maine Climate Council, which name the members who would be on, has a number of different statutory requirements. And I would actually encourage all the new Maine Climate Council members to check out the statute at some point. We're happy to send it along to you. It's hard to sometimes find these things in the depths of state government. But the statute itself requires us to really think deeply about equity. And these are the actual sections of law that are part of our mandate. So really, how do we ensure that all sectors and regions of the state benefit from the achievements of greenhouse gas reduction and the considerations of economic quality of life and public health and benefits? And obviously, there's these other things that really that require the council to think deeply about low-income residents, diverse residents, and how that they are really at the center of our climate planning. Next slide. So the way that we went about this work, the first requirement that we set out is that each of the Climate Council working groups would really think about each of the strategies proposed and what would it mean for equity and how do we ensure equity in those outcomes. We did that work and it was really valuable, and I think that our groups took it incredibly seriously. But as we went through that process, it became clear that we needed to go deeper. So we worked with the University of Maine, the George Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions, to produce a more thoughtful report on the proposals that were coming out of the Maine Climate Council and their impacts on equity. And this is a really helpful report, but I will say one of the things the report said was, you need to go deeper, you need to go further, you need to really engage on each of the strategies, and you need to think about the process and the metrics by which you do it. So this was really helpful. It, I think, had a significant impact on our climate plan, but it also said you need to do a lot more. So next slide. So we as part of the outcome of the climate plan, established the Equity Subcommittee to really now dive in more specifically into both the recommendations made by the climate plan, but how do we actually track it? So we're not just saying, yes, we want to do these good things. We want to make sure that all people benefit. We want to ensure that diverse communities and low-income populations especially benefit. But how do we actually make sure that we're doing it in a meaningful way? So we created the Equity Subcommittee and had an incredible group of people who spent a lot of time together on the internet and reaching out to communities to think more specifically, and also to propose most specifically tracking and monitoring mechanisms to ensure that programs and benefits reach the intended populations and communities. So I think that is my last slide, but that is really sort of where the work that Gabriella, Ambassador Dana took over, and again, spent months with a group of people that they'll probably talk about, thinking more deeply about how to speak to this mandate. And I think they also thought deeply about what are the next steps. So this is sort of the foundation of our next climate plan as well. So I really just want to thank them both again for their leadership and the leadership of the staff who aided in this work and all the members who served on the working group. We're going to talk a little bit at the end of their presentation about next steps and what formally should the Maine Climate Council do. But I will just stop there, and I will specifically, again, just say thank you to you both for your heavy lifting, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Director Pingree. I think that means it's me, if I'm following correctly. Good morning, everyone. I'm Molly and Dana. You've heard that I co-chair this subcommittee, and I can't say enough about the work and dedication of all of our members, and I'm deeply thankful for you all, and especially my co-chair, Gabriella, who you will also hear from today. So thank you to the directors and Commissioner Loism for seeing the importance in our work. And I really hope that after our presentation, we can have a great discussion about the things we've been up to. I wanted to say just a few words about why we think this work is important before we share our recommendations this morning. The effects of climate change will affect us all in profound ways and will create significant hardships for people and communities in more vulnerable positions in society, such as low-income residents, older adults, Indigenous people, people of color, and others who are less able to respond. We are already seeing the significant impacts of more frequent storm events in our neighborhoods, communities, and ecosystems. Maine has an opportunity and a responsibility to help our communities take climate action, and we must work together to ensure that strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare for the impacts of climate change benefit all people in Maine, especially those most vulnerable. On December 1st, 2020, this council released Maine Won't Wait and established the Equity Subcommittee to support ongoing planning and implementation of the state's climate strategies to ensure that shared climate benefits reach diverse populations in Maine. The Equity Subcommittee was tasked with setting equity outcomes for climate actions, monitoring progress, and making recommendations to this council. Over the course of our work, we have reviewed the strategies in Maine Won't Wait to identify opportunities to reach those most in need, work with state agencies and the Climate Council's working groups to refine those recommendations and highlight actions already underway. And we've developed equity metrics to measure the impact of programs and benefits on priority populations and communities.
Thank you, Molly-Ann. And I just want to also reiterate the thanks and gratitude to everybody, particularly the staff that supported the Equity Subcommittee. The recommendations in our report are organized to align with the strategies in Maine Won't Wait, as you'll see, and they include actions to ensure that the benefits of Maine's climate actions reach those who need it most, and to support increased participation in state climate and energy processes. There are specific recommendations for this council to consider to more firmly integrate equity into the state's climate action plan going forward. The report is an important first step that, as we confront climate change and its effects, our efforts benefit all Maine people. We're grateful for the members of the Equity Subcommittee who have given so generously of their time and their knowledge, to state agency staff and working group members for their collaboration and partnership, and to members of the public who have shared their great ideas and suggestions. Over the next hour or so, we're going to remind you about the Equity Subcommittee process, focusing on our work to align our recommendations with those of Maine Won't Wait. We think it's really important to spend some time on our framework, approach to priority populations, metrics, and tracking. We were then going to walk you through our recommendations aligned with each of the sections of Maine Won't Wait. We will then conclude by presenting a proposal for the structure of the Equity Subcommittee moving forward and discussing recommendations for this council to further involve priority populations in the next planning process this fall. There's a lot of content, and we're going to be talking for quite a bit at you. So we're especially grateful for your reading of these recommendations in advance of today's meeting so that they'll make more sense to you. Members of the public can find a copy of our final report at the link that is posted in the chat.
Before we get started, I wanted to review what we are asking you to do at the end of today's presentation. First, we are asking you to incorporate the equity outcome metrics proposed in this report as part of our annual climate plan reporting. These metrics are aligned with our existing reporting and goals. Incorporating these metrics means that the agencies and partners will start collecting baseline data to better understand how the programs and recommendations in the climate plan are impacting vulnerable people and communities. As part of the next climate planning process, we hope that the working groups will be prepared to develop equity goals and that these goals will be integrated into the update of the next climate plan. Second, we are asking you to agree to the proposed structure of this subcommittee moving forward and to identify equity seats on each working group. And finally, we're asking you to work with the Equity Subcommittee to implement many of the procedural equity recommendations contained in our report, helping ensure that vulnerable people and communities have full access to help develop and implement our next climate plan. With that, Gabriella will walk us through the next section of our presentation.
Thanks, Ambassador Dana. So I'm going to spend a few minutes reminding us of how the Equity Subcommittee arrived at the recommendations before you today. We'll then review our framework for considering equitable actions. As you know, the state's climate action plan has numerous directives to consider, serve, and invest in vulnerable communities. Equity was considered along with multiple other outcomes during the council's original planning process. And you recommended the formation of an equity subcommittee to center considerations of vulnerable people in climate plan implementation. The equity subcommittee was formed in 2021 worked together for a year to develop some interim recommendations, and spent much of the last 10 months finalizing those recommendations. The council reviewed our interim work in March of 2022, at which time we proposed further consultation with working groups to refine and revise all of our recommendations. And so starting in April 2022, each working group met 2 times to consider and comment on our interim recommendations. At the same time, the GoPIF team met with state agencies and others to learn about equity actions already happening and develop equity metrics. All of the agencies and quasi-state agency partners represented on this council participated in these consultations. The Equity Subcommittee used all of this input and examples of actions that were already underway to refine and restructure our interim equity recommendations so that they would align more closely with the Maine One Weight. Our subcommittee was also charged with developing metrics to monitor more equitable climate implementation and to help understand how and where climate actions and investments are serving priority populations and communities. To help develop metrics, we worked with a consultant, Amanda Dwelly, who has deep expertise in monitoring and evaluating equity outcomes. Many thanks to Amanda for her work on this. Towards the end of last year, our subcommittee held a public comment period, reviewed its final report, and we adopted our recommendations at the end of January. Next slide. Members of the public and affected agencies played a very important role in helping finalize this body of work. As you may recall, our subcommittee conducted a robust and geographically diverse stakeholder process in 2021 during the peak of the pandemic to seek feedback on our interim recommendations. This included creating a plain language version of our recommendations so they would be more accessible and taking them into conversation across Maine communities. Public comments were encouraged during most working group meetings last year, and in between the meetings, the GoPIF equity staff team met with all of the agencies listed here on the slide, which are all agencies implicated in the final equity actions. Agencies shared examples of their work already underway, some of which substantively met our original equity recommendations and helped identify revisions to our interim recommendations. Finally, the subcommittee also consulted with the Permanent Commission on the State of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations about procedural equity and meaningful involvement. I share this background as a way of assuring you that the Equity Subcommittee and staff team engaged in robust consultation with experts, agencies, and members of the public, building collective support for the recommendations before you today. Our final report follows the structure that you see on this slide. It starts with identifying priority populations for climate action and a framework for metrics and tracking. It then follows the chapter structure of the Maine One Weight with the intention that equity goals, actions, and indicators will align with existing Maine One Weight strategies. In most instances, our recommended equity goals nest under Maine One Weight strategies, and equity metrics nest under the Maine One Weight progress indicators. The report also lays out some cross-cutting recommendations for public engagement, what we call procedural equity, a way to really have meaningful participation, focusing on recommendations for considering and involving people in planning and decision-making across the state climate energy processes. The report also lists some information gaps, including baseline studies and benchmarks that the next climate action planning process should consider. Ultimately, the Equity Subcommittee was tasked with developing equity outcome indicators and metrics, as well as with making recommendations to equitably implement our climate action plan. Similar to the metrics we monitor to understand our overall climate actions, we wanted some tools to measure progress towards our equity goals. So our report now identifies metrics to track and in some instances to report annually. Substantively, this report includes helpful revisions and identifies opportunities to better serve priority populations. It is structurally aligned with Maine One Weight and has undergone significant review by implementing partners. Before we jump into understanding priority populations, I want to share a snapshot of the equity outcome metrics that we are inviting you to incorporate into ongoing reporting efforts. So let's look briefly at the next two slides. So as you'll see on this slide and on the next, these outcome metrics are aligned with Maine One Weight's goals and indicators and assess the share or distribution of participation, projects, and funding among priority people, businesses, and communities. Equity outcome metrics are only established for outcomes with an existing corresponding Maine One Weight goal or indicator. For recommendations without a corresponding measure, monitoring metrics are recommended in a report to identify and track progress towards equitable outcomes. These metrics are intended to track and aggregate the percentage of participation in and funding for climate, energy, and resilience goes to priority populations and communities across the entire economy as captured in Maine One Weight. The Equity Subcommittee recognizes that simply targeting a proportional number of priority populations or community is not sufficient to achieve equitable climate outcomes. Rather, equity outcomes may seek to overserve or overrepresent the most vulnerable populations and communities. The equity outcome metrics in this table provide a necessary starting point for determining equity goals and targets. We recommend setting such targets as an activity for the next climate planning process. Next slide. And here are the rest of them. In total, we recommend about 15 equity outcome metrics. We're going to continue with our presentation this morning, but I encourage you to put any questions you have about the subcommittee's process in the chat. We'll answer them there or come back to them during our discussion. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ambassador Dana.
Thank you, Gabriella. Moving on, I'd like to introduce the Equity Subcommittee's framework for thinking about priority populations and how equity metrics help us track progress towards reaching and serving those priority populations. This framework is used across all of our recommendations, regardless of sector. After this section, we'll present a summary of our specific recommendations. This slide reviews the priority populations that we identified. These are people, communities, and businesses that we need to consider and involve in climate and clean energy planning and implementation. These populations are at the core of the program outcomes that we need to track to understand equity. We can think of priority populations in three groups. The first is individuals and households. In nearly all of our equity recommendations, low-income people and households are prioritized. Some recommendations consider other characteristics like employment status, health, mobility, or housing, depending on sector. For example, renters are considered in many of our housing or energy recommendations. Second, the subcommittee prioritized at least one type of community for nearly all recommendations, including low-income, rural communities, disadvantaged communities, and frontline communities. And for some recommendations, tribal communities. More about these on the next slide. Finally, some equity recommendations relate to economic and workforce development, where priority populations include workers and businesses in natural resource industries, clean energy and energy efficiency, and in some cases, small minority or women-owned businesses. Looking at the considerations on the right, you can probably think of cases where not everyone in a particular priority population may be vulnerable or under-resourced. Not all priority populations and communities face the same vulnerabilities or barriers for accessing climate programs. Rather, we think about equitable climate action as that which considers and addresses multiple or intersecting vulnerabilities. For example, thinking about older adults, some may live in housing or remote locations that are more vulnerable to flooding or natural disasters, while others in rural or remote locations may not face the same impacts. Thinking about communities, our subcommittee discussed many different risks and vulnerabilities. For some strategies, the state may focus on rural, BIPOC, or low-income communities facing particular climate change or economic risks. For others, we may focus on communities with limited planning staff or capacity. Many of our equity recommendations are about programs that already have existing eligibility criteria or federal guidelines, programs like HEAP. Since these programs already have definitions for low-income individuals or definitions of disadvantaged communities, our report does not provide alternative definitions or criteria. This allows agencies to align priority populations for climate actions and tracking with existing program or federal guidelines. Next slide. Looking more deeply at communities and many recommendations, our subcommittee prioritized at least one of 4 types of communities. Many climate and energy programs already prioritize low-income or rural communities through specific criteria and thresholds. Those specific criteria and thresholds vary based on federal or state definitions. The terms disadvantaged and frontline communities have been used by several state and federal programs. Typically, disadvantaged communities face multiple or intersecting burdens, economic, environmental, or health vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities can often intersect with race or ethnicity, with BIPOC communities experiencing disproportionate burden. Frontline communities are those facing the first and worst impacts of climate change, considering both their climate and socioeconomic or demographic vulnerability. This could include natural resource industry dependent communities such as fishing communities. Maine has not established definitive criteria for these terms, though several federal and state screening tools exist to look at community characteristics. And federal guidelines like Justice 40 are already working to help ensure that federal benefits for climate and clean energy spending flow to disadvantaged communities. Understanding the variety of criteria in use, our final report does not recommend specific criteria or thresholds for these community types so that agencies and climate partners can establish priority populations that align with their programs. Holding priority populations in mind, let's move into metrics. We've already looked together at a summary for our proposed equity outcome metrics, which track who benefits from Maine's climate actions, who participates or receives funding, where investments or infrastructure upgrades occur, and whether it's a fair share. Outcome metrics and the combined outcome of all state actions and investments to serve all of Maine's people and communities. 2 other key pieces of the metrics framework are contained in our report and include actions tracking, which is simply keeping track of whether and when the state is implementing some of the processes and recommendations in our report, and monitoring metrics, which are meant to help planners and program staff see if certain actions are gaining traction. These intermediate indicators often measure access, applications, or the geographic distribution of climate benefits. Let's dig into equity outcome metrics. The progress indicators in Maine Won't Wait are the basis for our proposed equity outcome metrics. Maine Won't Wait contains 11 statewide indicators to determine if the state is on track to reach overall energy, resilience, economic, and jobs goals. You can see these on the left. These existing indicators emphasize the benefits that Maine people and communities experience on the ground from Maine's actions and investments. Energy savings, heat pumps, broadband, jobs, and spending on infrastructure and other projects which have direct and indirect local benefits. And most of these are overall statewide metrics like the total number of EVs or heat pumps. The big question for equity is whether climate actions and spending are reaching disadvantaged, frontline, or otherwise vulnerable people and communities. To do this, the state needs to know where actions are happening geographically and who is benefiting. Nearly all of the indicators in Maine Won't Wait could be broken down further by location or by demographic or economic characteristics of participating individuals or households. Thinking about location first, this is basically where a project or investment occurs to understand whether projects, participation, or spending is serving low-income, rural, disadvantaged, or frontline communities. Numerous equity metrics consider community type so that we can look across climate programs and actions and say what percentage of projects, participants, or spending occurred in priority communities. For example, the infrastructure and resilience grants, we might want to know whether rural or frontline communities are applying for or receiving funding. Are they applying for or receiving climate or energy funding at the same or greater levels as other communities? The right side of the page is about who is participating or benefiting, mainly for programs that serve people or households, including workforce initiatives in climate impacted industries. Again, our question is whether priority populations are participating or benefiting at a similar or higher rate compared to other populations. We might want to understand what percentage of projects participants are spending are reaching low income and sometimes moderate income people, households, or businesses. Are they participating or benefiting at the same or higher rate as non-low income households? So in addition to outcome, a few other characteristics may be relevant for tracking in some sectors like housing, energy, or workforce development. For example, for workforce development, we might want to know about funding for climate impacted natural resource industry workers. A key part of equity metrics tracking is measuring not only what share of projects go to a particular priority population or disadvantaged community, but also knowing how much of the state is a disadvantaged community or priority population. This is called benchmarking. For all equity metrics, we'd like to compare or benchmark participation or spending to priority populations to a statewide share, like the percentage of low-income households or renters or rural or disadvantaged communities. While the Equity Subcommittee does not define specific goals or benchmarks in this report, we do include data sources and potential benchmarks in an appendix for agencies and programs to use. One thing important to note here is that benchmarking is a critical first step in understanding the distribution of climate benefits to priority populations. Benchmarking is not the same as setting equity goals, which would establish a level of investment that is considered equitable. We need data benchmarks across programs and recommendations in order to take that step. I'll wrap this section up with what aggregate reporting for equity outcome metrics could look like. Equity metrics are not necessarily meant to create a scorecard of what each specific program is doing, but rather to indicate whether the combined result of our climate actions and programs are reaching priority populations and communities. The existing Maine weight indicators roll up the combined result of all of our climate and clean energy actions and outcomes across multiple programs. Equity outcome metrics would take a similar approach, rolling up program and agency data to show an overall result of several funding streams or programs. To get these aggregate results, however, agencies will still need to track data at the program level. This means coding or assigning participation or spending to a town or census tract to categorize it as low income, rural, disadvantaged, or frontline. Are figuring out who is low to moderate income on the individual side. Some programs may assess or screen for income eligibility directly, while others could ask about eligibility or enrollment in other state or federal benefits as a proxy.
So that concludes our section on metrics. Thanks, Ambassador Dana. As with our last section, please put your questions in the chat or hold them until later for discussion. We're now going to summarize the recommendations that make up our final report. The recommendations build on the interim work brought to this council last year and pull together examples, content, research, and revisions to actions underway and actions that we recommend moving forward. We work with state agencies to understand what is possible and practical to study, implement, and track, and have realigned the structure of our report to track with Maine weight. And we applied the framework we just discussed to each sector of equity recommendations. We're grateful that you have had the chance to review the report in advance, as we don't have time to go through each chapter in detail this morning. Rather, we're going to summarize the intent of the goals and actions in each chapter, look together at the equity outcome metrics, and save some time to dig into procedural equity recommendations at the end. Next. So before turning to our recommendations, here is a snapshot of how they nest under the strategies of Maine weight. As you know, there are 8 strategies in Maine weight, ranging from clean transportation to engaging Maine people and communities. Each strategy contains between 1 to 5 overarching recommendations, each of which we have recommended actions detailed in the chapter. For the equity report, content is organized following the strategies of Maine weight. Each strategy contained within its own equity chapter contains 1 to 3 equity goal statements, each of which have recommended actions and metrics. So as you can see, these nest within each other. The goal statements, in many instances, restate the original Maine weight recommendations and identify a priority population or community for focused intervention. In fewer instances, the goal statements establish a new recommendation. So let's get started with clean transportation. The Clean Transportation chapter contains 3 high-level goals, which focus on increasing access to clean vehicles and reliable transportation for individuals and households who face barriers to safe, reliable, and clean transportation options. These barriers include income and housing type, particularly for renters whose landlords may not have an incentive to install EV charging, people with limited physical mobility or without access to reliable transportation, and people who rely on public transportation are also priority populations. Priority communities include those who are geographically isolated or who live in sparsely populated rural areas, which makes some current public transportation options unsustainable. They may also include low-income communities with limited resources for investment in transportation infrastructure and areas with higher exposure to transportation emissions. So you can see the wide range. Our recommendations focus on program and rule changes to increase EV ownership for these priority populations, ensure that EV charging is available and accessible in rural areas and for people who do not own their homes, and prioritize the expansion of shared and active transportation options for individuals and communities who currently have limited reliable transportation. The equity outcome metrics for this chapter, which align with the existing Maine Won't Wait indicators, are the number and percentage of EVs owned or leased by low and moderate income, or what we'll call LMI, households. Recognizing that we probably can't collect information like this through vehicle registration records, we propose as an interim proxy the number of EV rebates accessed by LMI drivers. This metric is meant to capture overall progress and access to clean personal vehicles among priority populations. Especially when we consider federal funding, there is more than one player helping LMI drivers access clean transportation. For progress reporting, we care more about how many LMI drivers have an EV than what specific program helped them get it, and clean transit program spending and location by community type. Again, this identifies a priority population for a climate goal that already exists. And I will pass it to Ambassador Dana.
Thanks, Gabriella. We are covering some ground here now. We're getting into it. Moving on to our recommendations about buildings. Our recommendations seek to increase access to clean, low cost, and efficient energy and heating for individuals and households who have the highest energy burdens. We also recommend developing additional weatherization and building code expertise in under-resourced communities. Across all of our recommendations, we try to identify people and communities in most need and serve them first, helping overcome financial, logistical, technical, and other barriers through our targeted recommendations. At the same time, we know that priority households and communities can often be on a long waiting list for building efficiency work or face other barriers to accessing timely and immediate renovations. So we need to ensure that while they wait, and while we help remove barriers to programs, folks continue to have access to strong energy efficient benefits. With rising energy costs statewide driven by global fossil fuel markets, an equitable transition to cleaner heating systems and healthy buildings requires both improving access to weatherization services and improving enrollment in assistance programs. Finally, we recommend that new and renovated construction, especially when serving a lower income market, is built to the highest efficiency standards. Through the recommended actions in this chapter, we seek to develop better information about homes most in need of energy retrofits to continue to prioritize efficiency funding to those people most vulnerable, and to identify and address additional barriers, financial, technical, or otherwise, for folks to upgrade their heating systems and weatherize their homes. We also recommend streamlined access to heating bill assistance and figuring out and addressing the gap between people who are eligible and those who actually enroll. And we look to support all of this work with more training and education in rural communities for code enforcement and more funding for clean energy projects and affordable housing. The equity outcome metrics for this chapter include energy cost burden in low-income homes and among energy bill assistance recipients, the number of and percentage of weatherization and heat pump projects in low-income homes among energy assistance recipients and by geography, and the number and percentage of affordable housing units built or renovated with clean or efficient energy technologies. I'll continue with our clean energy recommendations, which seek to both increase access to affordable clean energy projects and increase meaningful opportunities for priority populations and communities to participate in decision-making about Maine's clean energy future, recognizing that the siting of large-scale renewable energy projects can present opportunities and challenges for host communities. With regards to access to clean energy benefits, we're particularly focused on people with high energy burdens, low-income renters, and communities without access to planning resources or capital to invest in clean energy projects. We're also focused on clean energy opportunities for natural resource industries due to their potential exposure to climate risks, and for those functioning on the economic margin, lack of resources, or risk tolerance to access innovative clean energy solutions. The recommended actions in this chapter seek to increase information and data about people and households facing the highest energy burdens and to increase access to cheaper clean energy resources for those households, including community solar projects. We also recommend providing financial and technical assistance to households, businesses, and communities to help them access clean energy, including exploring new or expanded financing options that consider the lower borrowing capacity of low-income households or communities, or which solve other financial challenges. Beyond the individual level, we've also recommended formal mechanisms to consider and involve disadvantaged communities in energy siting decisions, and to assist host communities in accessing fair and equitable benefits from clean energy development. In this chapter, the equity outcome metric is energy cost burden for priority populations and disadvantaged communities, reflecting that part of our goal in transitioning to clean and efficient energy and heating sources should be to reduce inequities for priority and vulnerable populations. We would hope this indicator declines over time. And I will turn it back over to Gabriella.
Thank you. So Strategy D in Maine Won't Wait has two sets of recommendations related to economic development and jobs. It first focuses on new job opportunities in the clean energy economy, especially for historically disadvantaged workers. The second focuses on natural resource industries such as forestry, farming, fishing, and helping these industries and workers adapt to a changing climate. Our equity recommendations address barriers to employment in both natural resource and clean energy industries for priority individuals, while at the same time they seek to ensure continued prosperity and resilience for those communities where local economies, livelihoods, and cultures depend on these industries. Our recommendations in this chapter focus on the idea of a just transition. Just transition is the idea that a fair and equitable climate and economic transition requires the state to plan for and respond to climate change in a way that does not negatively impact and strengthens wherever possible workers in industries facing disproportionate climate impacts. Together, we must make sure that these priority populations and communities have access to high-quality, climate-friendly jobs. For the clean energy sector, our recommendations address workforce bottlenecks for electricians and ensure that clean energy career development and job resources engage priority individuals and address educational, cultural, and other barriers to entry into these sectors. We also recommend proactive work from the state to understand and plan for career pathways for workers in industries which might be impacted by climate change in the future. For the natural resources sector, we recommend increasing data about the makeup of the sector and its businesses, including identifying barriers to entry and opportunities to increase diversity within the sector. We also recommend that the state support value-added product development in this sector, as well as targeted job training opportunities to help workers adapt to climate change. And finally, we recommend assessing the impacts of climate risk on the food supply chain in Maine, particularly in communities which experience food insecurity or which rely on subsistence agriculture, which may include tribal communities. The equity outcome metrics in this chapter are the number of clean energy jobs held by priority populations and the geographic distribution of those jobs. There is no Maine won't wait indicator associated with natural resource industry jobs or workers, or with climate resilience of these industries, though many of the strategies in Maine won't wait are designed to increase the resilience of both lands and waters and workers. However, since there isn't a clear statewide indicator, and since we need more and comprehensive data about the sector, especially given its diversity, we do not propose an overall equity outcome indicator for that specific goal. Now, sorry, deep breath. Now turning to strategy E, our recommendations seek to increase access to natural areas, to protect the livelihoods of those who work with Maine's natural and working lands and waters, and to enable further consultation with tribal nations. We also recommend improving access to good climate information for people working in these industries, especially when they need to make decisions about a climate uncertain future. In this chapter, we also focus on the importance of culture in our understanding of nature and the environment, both in terms of understanding who uses and feels welcome to use green spaces in Maine, and in terms of understanding the value of traditional ecological knowledge in addressing our changing climate. A recent study in New England found that communities with the largest proportions of lowest income residents or people of color experience significantly less access to protected open spaces. One of our recommendations in this chapter is to understand this trend in Maine. We need good baseline data on distribution of and access to, as well as use of, green space, natural and working lands and waters across the state, especially for disadvantaged communities. We also recommend the establishment of equity criteria for natural resource related grant making, as well as associated technical assistance to help priority communities apply for and receive funding. We also have several recommendations regarding data. For example, we recommend adding social science to the state's scientific climate assessments, making climate data available in a single platform that communities can access and use, consulting with tribal communities about the use of data that impacts or is generated by their communities. And finally, we recommend including more Maine people in participatory climate science, which helps build trust, climate literacy, and support for community-driven climate action. The equity outcome metrics for this chapter include the geographic distribution of publicly accessible lands and waters, as well as natural resource related grant funding. Given that there isn't an existing Maine won't wait indicator associated with the data, research, and decision making, we didn't recommend an outcome metric related to these recommendations. And I'll pass it to Ambassador Dana.
Thank you. Let's turn to community and infrastructure resilience. We recommend 3 goals in this chapter. The first increases assistance to disadvantaged communities to plan for climate change and fund projects. This includes asking the Community Resilience Partnership to continue to target its funds to those communities in most need, and to continue to work with partners to recruit smaller and more socially vulnerable communities with the goal of achieving proportional or better representation of these communities in the program. It also includes establishing equity criteria across all climate resilience funding opportunities and tracking the distribution of that funding over time to ensure that vulnerable communities are not missing out. Our second goal focuses on the intersections of climate change and health, especially for vulnerable people and communities. We address several concerns under this goal, including both indoor and outdoor air quality, extreme heat and cold, and psychological resilience to climate change. Our recommendations provide more information about indoor air quality and its relationship to fossil fuel combustion inside of homes, as well as assess outdoor air quality exposures and health outcomes in low-income and rural communities identified as high risk. Other recommendations in this chapter integrate climate considerations into existing planning efforts and health networks and at hospitals around the state. And recommend the development of psychological resilience resources about climate change to share with community members, municipal officials, businesses, healthcare systems, schools, and other entities. Our final goal in this chapter tries to help people respond safely to storms and other natural hazards driven by climate change, no matter their language, information sources, mobility challenges, or other vulnerabilities. The main vote weight indicator most closely related to the goals to these goals is the number of towns with community resilience plans, and the equity outcome metric breaks that indicator down by priority populations. Chapter G. For Strategy G, we want to help frontline and disadvantaged communities access climate resilient infrastructure planning, technical assistance, and funding. The state can help communities identify vulnerable infrastructure, supporting them in acquiring funding for planning and engineering, and help community members better understand climate risks and hazards. We know that support across the whole project pipeline is necessary, from identifying projects to assistance planning to ensuring access to long-term and reliable funding to complete projects. Establishing equity criteria that take into account a community's resources and its climate vulnerability across all infrastructure funding opportunities is one way to ensure that ongoing access to these opportunities reaches all communities. Finally, we know that homeowners and other people who own or acquire property and infrastructure might also want to understand potential climate risks to that infrastructure now and into the future. So we recommend promoting climate risk literacy and resources for real estate professionals and other lenders. The equity outcome metric for this chapter breaks down infrastructure resilience funding by disadvantaged, frontline, or other priority communities. And I will send it back over to Gabriella.
Thank you. So there's one strategy left in Men Won't Wait, engaging Maine people, and an aligned chapter in our report with the same name. In this chapter, we start to pivot towards procedural equity, or the idea of enabling meaningful involvement for all people in our climate plan and its outcomes. Our report also contains a standalone chapter focused on procedural equity because we consider this to be so important. The recommendations from Chapter H and Procedural Equity chapter are related. They are all part of the overall effort to further engage Maine's communities and people in the next climate planning process. Given the cross-cutting nature of these recommendations, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper than we have in the past chapters and walk through each action we recommend for these concluding chapters. All of our recommendations seek to achieve more equitable outcomes for priority populations and communities across all climate programs and opportunities. To do this, we need to address barriers to accessing climate information and to participating in planning, in decision-making, in programs, and in funding opportunities. For individuals and households, these barriers might include, but are certainly not limited to, a lack of awareness about opportunities, use of diverse communication and information networks, lack of time or financial resources to access opportunities, language access or literacy challenges, lack of computers or the internet, and lack of transportation to in-person only meetings. For communities, these barriers might also include lack of capacity to apply for funding opportunities. The subcommittee recommends a goal of increased participation by priority populations and communities in climate-related planning, program design, decision-making processes, and funding opportunities, and in climate education and engagement, reflecting both the original recommendations of Strategy H and Men Won't Wait and our procedural recommendations. Given the cross-cutting nature of the public engagement, we have several actions to recommend, split across the next two slides. And they include adopting guidance for conducting outreach in and increasing participation by priority populations and disadvantaged communities, identifying and funding climate education and engagement partners and service providers to reach priority populations, and especially working with communities and community-based organizations to align outreach with people's existing and trusted social networks and channels. Identifying opportunities to incorporate diverse and culturally appropriate understandings of climate action and impacts. Ensuring end-to-end language accessibility for written and online materials, assistance and advisory services and meetings. And offering a variety of meeting times, agendas, and avenues 2, participation to align with work and childcare schedules. Developing a mechanism for reimbursement for disadvantaged individuals to participate in climate and clean energy committees and working groups, and providing shared transportation options to in-person meetings. The last 2 actions on this slide serve to summarize recommendations we also included in sector-specific chapters and seek to address barriers to communities with fewer staff or financial resources. And they include considering community capacity in all application scoring and award processes, and developing person-to-person advisory and assistance services to help people in communities navigate and apply for climate-related programs. Given these goals, we've identified a number of monitoring metrics which can help us know if we're on track for engaging priority populations. They're here on the screen on this slide. There are no existing Maine Won't Wait indicators associated with outreach, so we do not recommend an equity outcome metric at this time. And back to Ambassador Dana.
We'll now move on to our last set of recommendations before we conclude. Thank you for settling in and hanging in there with us. These are our proposals for an updated role and structure of the Equity Subcommittee and additional procedural equity recommendations for this council. First, we propose better integration of the Equity Subcommittee into the state's climate work moving forward. We don't want climate equity recommendations to be an add-on or a parallel process in the state's next climate planning process. Instead, we recommend a structure which recognizes our unique role as a subcommittee, especially focusing on procedural equity, and also acknowledges the deep sector-specific expertise within each working group. We propose that the next equity subcommittee be made up of at least 2 sector-specific equity experts appointed to each working group to serve as full members of each working group and additionally as members of the equity subcommittee. At least 2 social scientists appointed to the science and technical subcommittee also to serve as members of the equity subcommittee. The appointment of 5 ad hoc equity subcommittee advisors to advise this council on equitable and meaningful involvement of priority populations in the state's climate planning process. Ad hoc members will include at least some members of this council, and equity subcommittee chairs will be selected from this group. The Equity Subcommittee, comprised of these 19 members at a minimum, will convene twice annually to discuss progress across working groups and across the state's climate action plan. Ad hoc members will meet more frequently with council and working group leadership to advise on procedural equity. And this structure reflects how the subcommittee has been functioning for the past year in consultation with the working groups, and provides an organizational framework to monitor the outcomes of our work moving forward, as directed by this council in Maine Won't Wait.
We also wanted to propose some additional equity recommendations meant to be additive to the procedural actions we just reviewed for this council. The first is to incorporate equity training into orientation for all Maine Climate Council and working group members in advance of the next climate planning process. We recommend that this training cover topics related to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and implicit bias. The second is to identify additional opportunities to hear from priority populations and communities, including storytelling, listening sessions, and increased opportunities for statewide, virtual, and in-person participation. This work can be supported by the ad hoc equity subcommittee members, who will solicit ideas and make recommendations to the Maine Climate Council to increase participation by affected people and communities. The third is to establish a mechanism for formal consultation with the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations, which again can be conducted by the ad hoc equity subcommittee members on behalf of this council. This consultation will inform the equity subcommittee's recommendations to this council about meaningful involvement. Next, we recommend developing tools and guidance to formalize the way that working groups consider and respond to equity concerns throughout the next Climate Council planning process. The staff team at GoPIF will lead this work. We also recommend that this council and its working groups seek to achieve greater than proportional representation by Black, Indigenous, and people of color and other priority populations on their memberships. This is work that will be necessary to accomplish over time, but we think it's also essential. And finally, we recommend that this council explore opportunities to offer reimbursement of expenses for affected members of the working groups, as is currently allowed for council members. These proposals are meant to help this council continue to be accountable to those main people who can benefit most from our climate actions. And we think the proposed structure of the subcommittee will help us continue to focus on equity throughout the entire climate planning process. Thank you so much for your time and your attention this morning. I'm now going to turn it back to Hannah and Melanie.
Great. Well, I feel like I wish I had a more celebratory way of thanking both of you for that in presentation, being so thorough. I think the recommendations are incredibly thoughtful and offer, I think, a very clear pathway for this council. So I think our hope now is that we spend a little time hearing any questions, but also any comments. I think the kind of most heavy lifting is we would really like this council to think about the metrics that have been proposed, which are really about how do we track our progress going forward and come to some consensus on the next steps. So we have stopped sharing, and I see that Gary has a question in the chat. I don't know, Gary, if you want to comment on that, and Melanie and I and the co-chairs can try to answer it. Well, I can just read it if Gary's not. He asks, will the sizable equity report be integrated into the entire 2024 Climate Council report, attached in full text as an appendix, or condensed into an executive summary chapter? Gary's highly organized and he's gearing up. I'm so excited to have him on the council. I will say that is really a question for this Climate Council. With our past work, I think as many as you know, we had multiple reports, from the equity report to modeling analysis that we sort of attach and put online so everyone can see sort of the products that went into the work. I think our hope is that we really integrate the metrics if this council agrees, and then integrate the recommendations as we think about the next steps for the strategies of Maine Won't Wait. I don't know, Melanie, if you'll comment on it in any other way, but I would just say I think it's a collaborative process what the next Climate Council report looks like, and how we and the working groups and the chairs of those groups engage with these recommendations. But I think, Gary, is a really thoughtful question that is kind of up to all of us as we embark on the next steps. Jody.
Thank you. This is just a tremendous report, and I just want to thank everyone involved in creating it, a huge amount of work. I had two questions related. One was, given the fact that the working groups are going to be sort of reconstructed very soon, and a couple of the recommendations have to do with working group knowledge and also working group membership. I'm wondering if more specific thought has been given to the question of reimbursement, or developing a mechanism for disadvantaged individuals to access stipends or reimbursement for participation, because that will, I think, play into who would be tapped for additions to these working groups, and if thoughts have been given to sort of standardized training for DEI, training for all of the working group and council members yet.
Jody, thank you for that question. And I will say, I think on both fronts, we are trying to understand some of the constraints of state government and how we would do this, and sort of thinking about our next process. And just to be clear, we actually haven't named the new working groups. And so I think there's some time and sort of creative thinking about how we can do exactly that. And then as it relates to the trainings, I actually think, I don't know if Gabriella or Ambassador Dana want to comment. I think we are I think lots of folks on the Zoom screen have engaged in this work, and we want to make sure that we do it right in a way that is useful and you know, prepares people for the work ahead. So we are open to ideas, and we'll be thinking over the next couple of months about how to do this well. Noel.
I have to echo what's been said already. I think this is tremendous work. I think I'm really pleased to see all the results of that work and the recommendations. I can only imagine how much hard work went into that. So kudos to all the folks involved in that work. The one area that is missing that I'm hoping we could look into and bring to this conversation as we move forward in a constructive way is looking at legislation that exists that has an adverse impact on, on folks, and, good, well-intended legislation, pieces of legislation that have to do with, climate change and sustainable energy and our energy dependence, and sometimes they have negative impact on ratepayers and individuals. Particularly, I'm going to speak from the perspective of older adults who then have to pay and have to decide how they're going to pay for prescription drugs versus food versus utility costs. And some of our well-intentioned pieces of legislation do have a very adverse impact on individuals. So I'm hoping that we could include that in this conversation as well as we look at equity and addressing inequities that exist, that may again happen not with malintent, but when we don't think about all the potential impacts and adverse impacts on people. So I'm hoping we could include that in the conversation as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Noel. And I will say, I think that's certainly on the minds of Ken Coburn and Dan Burgess as they think about the next phase of the energy working group. And I know that the governor's energy office has been doing some specific work thinking about energy burden, especially for low-income populations and I know Michael Stoddard and Maine Housing and others are also thinking about the same things. I don't know if any of them want to comment, but I just would say I think that's a absolutely on the radar, because obviously affordability is a pretty key equity question and conversation, and kind of required. So Dan or Ken or anybody want to make a comment? I also see Mike Abbott has a hand up.
And I might just respond and say I really appreciate that comment, and I'm hopeful that the work that we undertake here can look at the kind of the latest information that we're seeing on energy burden, and looking at not just the impacts of electricity costs, but also the reality that many people are facing when it comes to heating fuels and others, and the up and down price swings that we've seen recently, but also historically. And then we also look at the longer term solutions view as well. How do we provide and assistance needed that gets towards reducing that energy burden long term. So I think it's something that's ripe for additional discussion and learning from other jurisdictions and other states. So looking forward to jumping into that. Sure.
Hannah, this is Ken. I would just add that we also need to be mindful that the same communities suffer the greatest impacts of climate change too. So and we won't decarbonize Maine if we don't decarbonize 100% of the state, as opposed to just more affluent citizens. So it cuts both ways, that we need to address the burden issue, and at the same time, we need to address the impacts issue. Thanks.
Mike and then Sam.
Thank you. I just had a question in the report, following adoption of this subcommittee's report, and I'll echo the others to say that, this was a really great product you produced and a great presentation. The recommendation for state entities or state agencies would be to be collecting data on the monitoring metrics and the equity health outcome metrics. And there's some general sort of metrics listed in here. However, when it comes to each agency actually getting down to measuring what we do. And there are some examples of some initiatives and some other things that are already happening, but it's likely that we'll be developing more detailed metrics. And so would it make sense for, those to be, each agency that's involved in this to sort of develop a list of what we would propose to use? And so that this council can make sure they're aligned, those metrics are aligned with what we're trying to measure in terms of outcomes as listed in this report. That's just a general question.
Mike, that's really helpful. And I actually think that is exactly the work coming up in front of us. And I think for many in this council are aware that state agencies have been working hard. Mike and his team help oversee the drinking water program. Melanie's got stormwater and some of the metrics around how do we ensure that disadvantaged communities are receiving the benefits. There's obviously new federal requirements under Justice 40, and we can get into more details about what that is. But we're all working hard to comply, and I think that's going to have positive results for the people of Maine. So I think, Mike, absolutely, that is, I think that the next steps. I think the overviews and the sort of overviews of the priority populations and allowing state agencies to really have some ability to make those choices, but then report back in a transparent way. I think we're trying to ensure transparency about the investments the state is making and the impact that they are having. So I don't know if Melanie, if you have any comment on that, but I would just say I think that this provides an excellent framework, but obviously there's still details about how we do this, and that I'm sure will even change as we figure out how do we collect this data and how do we report this data.
Yeah, following up on that, listening to the presentation and thinking about, Mike's question, I'm thinking it probably behooves us to have a conversation within the next month or so about exactly what Mike has just suggested. What data do each of us have that is responsive to what's identified in these metrics? What's the way that we can bring that together? And then, think about how that fits into the work of each of the working groups and the Science and Technical Subcommittee, and how we can probably, on behalf of the administration, sort of bring that to bear as a resource collectively to bring forward to this council. So I think that's something that we'll all need to probably go back in the next month or two and think about in terms of data elements, what's available, what we can bring together, how we make that available, and make that a resource that the council's going to have access to, that we can use to think about as the working groups are doing their work starting in September, which, we'll talk about in a few minutes, sort of what the time frame is, but that's kind of the next steps is, we take this presentation and think about what we're going to do next as a council and how all of us as agencies are going to feed into that work. So thank you, Michael, for that question.
Thank you both for the answer. Great.
Sam.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for this report. I think it's super thorough. It gives us a really practical framework for kind of theoretical concepts. So thanks so much for all of your work over the last year. I saw in the report under strategy D, the mention of high quality jobs and procurement is kind of something as a next step, and would love to see how we could incorporate those into some of those equity outcomes sooner rather than later. There's a lot of pieces that USDOL, US Department of Commerce are really defining now around high quality jobs, around empowerment and representation and belonging and living wage and pay. And so we've just come back from a national conference that are really helping to define those pieces. And so I'm wondering how we can put those within the equity outcomes from a high quality jobs, not only the number of clean energy jobs created, but how many are high quality and include family sustaining benefits, include union neutrality, include workforce benefit agreements. So a lot of different pieces that are coming together at the federal level. Would love to see how we could incorporate those in the equity outcomes for the high quality jobs, and then the contracting piece of that federal funding. What percentage of those are using some of those tools to ensure good jobs and equity in the way that the funding is distributed.
I don't know if the co-chairs want to address that at all, and I see Francis fully on board, and I think that that's I think a really helpful addition. I mean, I will just say that I think the Equity Subcommittee has worked hard and proposed a framework that hopefully we start with sort of, I don't want to say the floor, but it's sort of the beginning of this work. I don't know, Gabriella or Ambassador Dana, if you have any more comment on that.
I would just say I totally agree that that's a wonderful addition, and I think it adds more dimension. And I think you're right, Hannah. The report provides a starting place. It's certainly not the end, and hopefully it's going to be iterative, so we'll continue to expand.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think thinking about, when we started this report and just gathering our committee and everything, the landscape as far as projects and developments has changed so much. So that's really an area around those jobs that we can dig in this next phase. That's an excellent comment.
Great. I'm going to read Ken Coburn's question in a minute, but first I see Representative Kessler's hand is up.
Hey there, reporting from the clerk's office break room over here. I really appreciate this report, and I just wanted to comment that I hope that we all are incorporating equity in our everyday decisions, using this as sort of a framework and prepping us in the work ahead. As a legislative member of this group, we're reckoning with these decisions in real time right now. I'm thinking in particular the impact that some of these efforts are going to have on priority communities, particularly around infrastructure. As we build transmission lines and build new renewables, we're grappling right now with the Northern Maine transmission line and making sure that those priority communities are well informed about what's going on. So I hope that we can further work on that particular issue, and would love it if I could chat with the co-chairs of this group later on to get their thoughts on what's going on.
Thanks, Representative Kessler, and that's helpful. And I think I as a couple people have noted, I mean, there is a lot of ongoing policy making that is actively engaging the same issues we're talking about here, I think, as people have said. And I will just say, I'm going to read Ken's comment. He says, outstanding report and equally good presentation. Thank you. Agree again. There are some cost ramifications of ESC's recommendations. Reimbursement, gathering, distilling data. Does the ESC have recommendations regarding the size and funding sources for these efforts? And he's thinking along the lines of a fiscal note associated with proposed legislation. And I will just note and see if the co-chairs or Melanie have any other comments, but as I think Melanie and I will talk about a bit, as we launch the next climate planning process, we have now the benefit of, I think as some people have heard, of a new EPA grant that every state across the country has received. It's a $3 million grant to support the state's climate planning process. It has actually some very specific requirements around how we evaluate underserved populations and contemplate workforce implications and opportunities, as well as many other things that can be directed by the state. So I will just say that's an opportunity to actually provide some investment and down payment on some of the things that are being recommended in this report, which is super helpful and exciting. And I will also say, and we'll get into this more at sort of upcoming meetings, since we enacted or agreed on our last climate plan, we have had obviously a very significant change in federal government funding coming to the state of Maine. Sam referred to this about what the DOL is considering at the federal level. I won't go through all the acronyms, but 3 to 4 major pieces of federal legislation that are providing funds to all of the states not only for climate action, but with some major climate focused areas. And they, a lot of them really emphasize benefits for disadvantaged populations. So I will just say, I think there's a great opportunity for this Climate Council. You know, we have the sort of to agree on the metrics, but then actually to make significant progress in moving the needle in the direction of many of the recommendations. I'm not saying it won't require state investment as well, but with these kind of tremendous federal resources, if we help prioritize them as we hope we can. So I don't know if anybody else has comments on Ken's question. Great. Any other sort of questions or comments? I'm hearing a lot of positive. I don't know if I even noted any negative other than how do we do the next thing? So that's obviously huge kudos to the co-chairs and the staff who worked on this, as well as the many members of their group who are, some of them probably watching. While we're just here, I also want to just point out that Joyce Taylor has joined us. She is the representative from Maine DOT. I don't know if anybody else just wanted to at least, there's a lot of heavy lifting in our transportation sector ahead. So just wanted to make sure everyone knew that the our chief engineer, who's really led in this, is here with us. So I'm just going to ask Molly to again put up the slides, because I think we just want to make sure we'll have more time in the future for discussing sort of how does the Maine Climate Council want to make decisions in this next round, as we contemplate strategies in our next plan. But I will just say that we've done well so far, and I'm not promising it will be perfect, that we kind of agree on a consensus basis to what's in front of us. And I think what we're hoping to come away with today is an agreement on the equity outcome metrics, and ensure that there's not a disagreement on the specific proposals that the committee has made around Maine Climate Council structure, how we envision equity members on the working groups and subcommittees, as well as the new equity subcommittee, and then also procedural equity. So let's start with the metrics. So Molly, do you want to just show the next two slides, give each a couple minutes? And again, I think as has been pointed out, this is sort of where we start, and then things like the quality of jobs would be actually a great conversation, I think, for especially the energy working group, thinking about specifically clean energy jobs. So Sam, I'm going to nominate you to join that working group as well. Show the next slide as well. So we're in a bit of a speak now or hold your peace until at least September, for are folks feeling positive about this? Some of these metrics we're collecting, some of them will require effort on the part of state agencies and other partners to figure out, how do we collect these metrics? How do we make sure that we can provide this information? But this is at least the place in which we want to start. And you can feel free to yell out politely.
No, this is Melanie, just piping in on behalf of state agencies. I think generally speaking, all of the agencies have had an opportunity to review these metrics. And I think it's safe to say that, we collectively think that we are going to be able to, in collaboration with all of you, bring this information together. And so we appreciate the Equity Subcommittee identifying metrics that are quantitative measures that are sort of within the scope of what we're able to actually provide information on. So, sometimes we're asked to provide information as agencies that none of us actually have any information to be able to answer those kind of questions. But there's been a lot of work that has gone into this in the last couple of years to try to boil this down to something that we think we can actually do. And I just note for the Climate Council at large that one of the things that we've all been trying to do, both for existing members and new members, is utilize all of our collective resources to pull this off. And so, what we're trying to identify for ourselves as work moving forward is something that we think that we can actually accomplish with existing resources. And so kudos to everybody who's been involved in this, that these are the kind of things that we think we're going to be able to provide in terms of information for the public and for policy making moving forward, that between the work of state government and all of you as members, that we're actually going to be able to measure some of these kind of things looking forward into the future.
I saw a floating trail of thumbs up coming from my Zoom screen. Any other comments? I think, again, as Melanie said, state agencies have really spent some time thinking about this and how we would operationalize it. So that was very helpful, Melanie. All right, so seeing no hands up, nobody is yelling into the Zoom. I think we're going to sort of consider that this is the next step for these equity outcome metrics make sense to this Climate Council, and they are something that we and our staff and state agencies will now start working to figure out how do we ensure we report on. Again, this is sort of setting the baseline for understanding how we are serving priority population, disadvantaged communities, and kind of gives us a really, I think, a very helpful base to then build from and plan for in the next climate plan. So thank you everyone for that. Noel.
Sorry about that. I was trying to figure out my unmute and raise hand option here, and it wasn't working. I think the interplay with data that also and metrics that could come from private and non-for-profit partners, I think if that could be included in that conversation, I just want to mention that out.
Excellent. And I feel like I've heard of an organization that has some incredible data, especially as it relates to our population and aging Mainers. So as we launch into this next plan and this focus, thank you, Noel, in advance. Okay, so let's just go back 2 slides, Molly. So just on these next 2 questions, I mean, I don't necessarily think it requires sort of a big formal vote, but I would just love to know if there's any other thoughts on the structure. Obviously, we are working to name the co-chairs of the upcoming working groups, as well as think about our process, and Melanie and I and our teams and sort of the entire leadership structure. We're sort of getting everything up and running. And I think obviously we are always open to comments, but just wondering if there's any sort of thoughts as you heard the presentation on structure and the sort of structure for the subcommittee, as well as procedural equity, if there's anything that concerns you or anything you want to add. Again, feel free to, there you go, Mike.
I don't know if it's a concern. I guess as I read through the report today, I know this was mentioned, but sort of as we talk about building resiliency into communities and infrastructure, you know, are we also thinking about the fact that, well, I guess not the fact, but the potential reality that Maine will become, you know, part of our challenge with climate change is becoming more resilient to climate change, but part of it is because we are where we are and we have the climate we have. we will likely become, in a way, a refuge for people that are moving away from areas that are not able to be resilient. And so I think this development of resiliency in our infrastructure, whether it's physical infrastructure or public health infrastructure, also has to consider economic incentives or economic strategies to, I guess, to build more resilient communities from a financial perspective, and so that we can, support all the resources that will be needed. I'm probably not wording this well at all, but I think this the strategy for resiliency has to come hand in hand with the strategy for economic development. This is what I'm thinking. I don't know if others have thoughts on that. I'm just not sure I saw any metrics in there that were specific to that.
I think that's a great point. And I would just say that might be something that we contemplate as we kind of kick off the next climate plan. I will just say that one of the things in the climate plan was thinking about our hope is to continue to grow the economy in GDP while we reduce emissions. And that requires complex strategies across every single working group. And I will just say, I think this isn't exactly what you asked, but I think there are issues that we will have to dig into in the next climate plan about growth in Maine, and how we manage that growth and how we kind of ensure both equity issues and lots of other kind of goals of this climate plan and how we balance that. And so I just would say, Mike, I think that's a really thoughtful point. And we've actually even thought about this sort of actually touches the work of every single working group. And so we're thinking about how to structure that conversation, because it is about land use, it is about economic development, it is about, our workforce, it is about equity and inclusion. I mean, it's all those things. So I will just say thank you for that. And I just would say we look forward to your brilliant ideas as a Maine Climate Council member about how we think about tracking that, and honestly, sort of contemplating the challenges and opportunities there. So.
And I would just add, it also includes thinking about things like public services and utilities, right? So wastewater management, drinking water services, habitat protection, habitat fragmentation, multi-use development in developed areas versus sprawl type development. So many of the things that the council talked about in the last 4 years, but as a result of both the pandemic and what we are seeing as consistent scientific indicators that we are likely to anticipate in migration to the state, how do we responsibly prepare for that in the coming years? So thanks for raising that, Mike.
Okay, any other comments? I will just say, I think, again, I think the next 2 steps beyond the metrics are kind of now the work of the leadership of the Climate Council and all of us as Climate Council members to kind of hold ourselves to account about the recommendations and the structure recommended. And our hope is that we can move forward, because I think they're all really thoughtful recommendations. So before we move on, I just want to thank everyone for engaging in that and sort of thoughtfully really considering the heavy lifting that has been done. And I just want to give Ambassador Dana or Gabriella the last word before we move on to next steps. And again, just recognizing them both with just a huge amount of gratitude for the heavy lifting that they and the staff put into all of this work, which has now been years of in the making. So any last word?
Just thank you all, and you really can't overstate the work that the staff put into this. Jess Scott has just been a real workhorse with pulling this all together. We had a fabulous facilitator, Carol Martin, and just very thankful. I had a baby and a maternity leave throughout the process. So Gabriella picked up the slack for me when I was out, and just lots of gratitude for everyone. Thank you.
I would just echo the gratitude and just to reiterate and emphasize the incredible work that the Equity Subcommittee members did, the working group and the staff, and same as with Molly and especially Jess Scott, and my multiple questions when I would get a little lost in our communication. So just so much gratitude and appreciation for the incredible work.
Great. Well, thank you both again. And Ambassador Dana had her absolutely adorable baby on early in the Zoom, who I hope is now sleeping quietly. But I just know, thank you both for doing this amidst a lot of other things in your life and jobs and everything else. So, okay, so we're just gonna wrap things up with kind of next steps. Just gonna go forward a couple slides. So one more slide, two more slides. So we're just now going to kind of remind you about what's happening next. And first of all, for the most part, you get to finish the legislative session, those of you who are deeply engaged in it, and have a nice summer and everything else. And I think I'm not going to go through this slide, Molly. So the next one, thinking about the next stage of the climate plan. So I think, as we said at the very beginning, our thinking about this next climate plan is that we are not throwing out, and we're just going to kick it off again. Just huge props to the Climate Council and all the working group members. We just like to emphasize that we got this national award for the best plan in the country, and I think this just really highlights that we are now building from both this Equity Subcommittee report and the climate plan itself from a huge position of strength. So we are now embarking on a process of just being in a really positive place to think about what's next. Next slide. And again, you've seen this slide many times, even today. So we have strategies in place in a framework to build from. Next slide. And in addition, we have been actively yearly reporting on our progress through both the DEP's annual emissions reduction report, as well as biennial report, as well as the dashboard of progress. And again, if any of you have not seen this dashboard, the link is at the bottom. We've been trying to be really transparent about how we are doing, where we're doing well, where we have lots of work to go. So, and obviously we now have a whole nother level of metrics, which I think are incredibly important and exciting, that we will add to this monitoring as we get into the next year ahead. Next slide. And I've already mentioned this, but I will just say we have this exciting $3 million grant from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant that is given, again, to every state in the country, the same amount to really do thoughtful climate planning. And the good news in Maine is that we've already done a lot of the things that they are asking states to do, which gives Maine the ability to spend this money to really go deeper and think about what's next. So as a part of this grant, we have requirements. You know, all the bullets are things that the federal government is asking us to do, as well as some of the things where we are thinking about going deeper. Obviously, our emission reduction strategies is a lot about transportation and buildings. We are thinking about how to engage more deeply in both land use and waste issues. So we have an ability to do some evaluation to really inform this Climate Council about how we take the next steps. We have on the bottom of this slide that after we do this planning, we expect the federal government to release implementation grants to the states, which will be competitive, but Maine can compete for nearly $5 billion of competitive implementation grants. So I think the work of this council is to really hone our next steps and figure out how Maine can continue to be a leader and receive federal funding to make many of our plans actionable. And again, this is actually just one of the many federal funding opportunities that Maine is competing for and will be competing for. So we'll just say it's an exciting time, and the work that this council does and the work that you do to direct us will really strengthen our ability to be successful and honestly make these things happen, especially in a way that benefits the communities that we've spent most of today talking about. So I will just say we are very excited to get going with you all. This specifically, the Science and Technical Subcommittee is already gearing up. They have a heavy lift to kick this thing off because we have always kind of based our climate planning and our analysis on the facts and what the scientists tell us, and that is what we plan to do again in this next upcoming process. So I will just pass it off to Melanie to sort of finish a couple more of the next steps in thinking about our work. And again, thank you all for really, really thoughtful attention to this first piece of work of the new Maine Climate Council.
Thanks, Anna. All right, next slide. All right, so what we have ahead of us. All right, so just as a reminder that the Maine Won't Wait first major climate plan was delivered December 1, 2020. Statute requires us to update that plan every 4 years. So our next big target is December 1, 2024. And the things that we're all going to be working on over the next year and a half is what that now boils down to, is identifying strategies that continue us on a trajectory to meet the emission reduction goals that we have in statute. So we are trying to develop strategies and plans to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, to reduce our gross greenhouse gas emission levels below 1990 levels by 2030. And then the big one, and I say this often and I'll say it again, the hard one is going to be getting to that 80% by 2050. So, and in addition to that, in the meanwhile, also ensuring that all the work that we are doing, we recognize climate change is coming. This is going to have an impact on our state. There are lots of opportunities in addition to the challenges that we are faced with as a result of that. And so the work that we are doing is not just to reduce emissions and sequester carbon, but also while all those changes are happening, to ensure that we are resilient to the changes that we know we are coming. So thank you all for being a part of the work that we're going to do. And I'm going to keep saying that four-letter word in the next few minutes. Next slide. So this is the part where I'm going to remind you all, thank you all for joining the council. You're here for a reason, right? So you're not here for navel gazing. We're not here for philosophical conversations. We're all here because we're trying to achieve the outcomes that I just identified. The really cool thing about this council is we are bringing together a lot of very committed people from all sectors of Maine's economy, from private sector, public sector, scientists, community members, advocates, everybody coming together, recognizing that there are things we need to prepare for in the state. We're feeding into developing a plan that is going to help everybody to move Maine forward in a way that's going to be economically beneficial and hopefully ensure that we're reducing our global impact as well as preparing the state for what we know is coming. So we will be forming our working groups. That's going to be happening over the next few months, identifying who's going to participate in all of these working groups to feed into the system of updating the plan that we already have in place. In the prior iteration, we had hundreds of people that were involved in this across the state, and that is going to happen again. This is a tremendous collaboration that is happening statewide to move us forward to plan for these emission reductions and for ensuring that our state is resilient to what we know is coming. Next slide. So time frame. This is May, we're already there. So that's the second little white circle on the timeline. By September, we will have our working groups together, members identified, and then there's less than 1 year that we're planning So this is kind of what we did last time. And for those who lived through it with us before, you know what this entails. But a variety of meetings to really focus on what kind of strategies we're going to recommend are adopted for the state. We have now a plan to work from. And so a big part of what we're going to be doing this time around is identifying what we might have missed, what we might have overlooked, what we need to incorporate, how we can do better. We've got lots of laws that have passed now, strategies that have been implemented in the last couple of years. So we're going to be building on the work of what we've already done and continuing to move that forward. And so again, I'm going to say it over and over again, this is going to be work for everybody. So thank you again for everybody who's joined the council, because this is not just about providing a few ideas and walking away. You're all here because we're all going to substantively contribute to this effort. You and your organization, who you're bringing to the table, we've got about a year to pull this off and figure out what else we need to do. As Hannah mentioned, we're going to have money from EPA. We'll be running models on policy strategies to figure out what kind of additional emission reductions we can achieve as the working groups are contemplating those kind of strategies. But we have a lot to accomplish by June of 2024. Those working groups then bring that back to you all as a council to really start chewing through what we think we need to recommend and what we're going to do as a state as an update to our 2020 plan. And so by September 2024, we come back together as a council and we have a really serious conversation about how that boils down into our next 4-year plan, which we will deliver December 1, 2024. So, you know, when we put it in statute that every 4 years, we're going to update the plan. 4 years sounds like a long time until you find yourself working your way through the time frame, and it's now May of 2023. And by September 2024, we all need to do a really substantive assessment of what's coming and what we need to plan to do to continue to move us forward into the future. So again, thank you all for committing to being a part of this, because we really appreciate the expertise and abilities that you're bringing to bear from all of your organizations, from all of your companies, everybody that you're representing. This is a huge lift on behalf of the state of Maine, but we come together in a remarkable kind of way to pull this off collectively. And thanks to Hannah and her team at GoPIF for coordinating all of it, because we're about to embark on the next cycle of it with this meeting. So this is your fair warning. You don't get the summer off. You get a little bit of time to think about what you want to do with the working groups, but we're going to form those working groups and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Next slide. So next, we will hopefully see one another in person, live, real size, not the 1-inch size that I see you all in on my tiny little laptop screen, in September. And at that point, we will have some additional information from our scientific and technical subcommittee, which we rely on very heavily for a lot of the work that we do. And then we will plan on our next quarterly meeting to be December 1st. So that sort of covers what you have coming ahead of you as a Climate Council member in 2023. And with that, I'll pass it back to Hannah.
I would just say that already Commissioner Loism and I have contradicted each other. I said they had the summer off, Melanie, and you just said they had to spend the whole summer working. So you have to spend the whole summer thinking thoughtfully about the work ahead. And I will say we will be in touch with you about your interests and intentions in terms of serving in working groups. Every Maine Climate Council member is welcome to join a working group and or just participate in the Climate Council itself. So you have the option of doing extra work but obviously your most important role is here. So I don't have any more to say other than thank you to Commissioner Loism and the staff, and especially the subcommittee chairs for all of their really helpful presenting today. And just again, a great welcome to our new Climate Council members, our returning ones. And again, we hope you have a great end of the legislative session and summer, and we will be in touch, and especially Molly will be in touch. So any other comments or questions before we say goodbye? All right, seeing none, well, thank you all. Great to see you all, and have an excellent day.